Okay, for all the candidates, is that what
Yeah,
I do
this is
for
for
all the
all.
candidates?
Yeah, this is for all the candidates.
I was wondering, what do you guys think of the proposed state income tax? Because a lot of people are really not into that, and the Democrats are trying to push it through the House. I'm not thinking that it was in the Republican platform, so I was just wondering what each of you guys thought of that.
So we'll start with Michelle, and we'll go down, and we'll try and get as many audience questions as possible, so just try and keep your answers brief.
I don't support a state income tax. Again, that's another form of wealth redistribution. I would like money to stay in our communities, in our families, and so I do not think that is a proper response, if you will. I actually think that right now we're using homelessness, education, transportation issues almost like an excuse for more taxation. And when we increase taxes, please understand that money comes from someplace. And even if, let's just say, because let's just tax the wealthy. Well, first of all, who's wealthy? 'Cause that's relative. And second of all, if let's just say wealthy is a household 150,000 or plus a year, and we want to impose an income tax on them. Those folks buy cars. They eat at restaurants. They spend money right here in our community, and that money creates jobs. I want the money to stay in our communities, fundamentally. I don't want wealth redistribution, and that's why I don't support the income tax. And in fact, I would like to see some tax reductions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I lived in a state that has state income tax, and it worked there. This state has not had a state income tax. I don't think that it'll work here. I am a Democrat. This is not one of my top issues, but I wouldn't support a state tax, just because I don't think we depend on. Well, I live up north, so in that area, retail businesses, they depend on the Canadians that come down here. A state income tax would take away that sales tax where they come and buy things. So I'm really not for it. I don't think the state is ready for it.
Thank you.
So as I said previously, I'm not in favor of a state income tax or capital gains tax, and let me tell you why. Number one is on a district basis. This issue has been on the ballot approximately 5 times over 30 plus years, and each time it's been voted down by very significant numbers. The case that Michelle mentioned, only the rich will pay, that doesn't happen. People realize that once you start with that, it'll eventually work its way down where everyone pays more. And people like the tax structure here. But number two is, it's a competitive advantage. I've doorbelled well over 4,000 homes. Paul Graves people are here. I'm going to catch it. I'm working on it. But the reality is when I talk to people who just moved here from out of state, especially California, and I knock on more Democrat doors than I do Republican doors, and when I talk to them and try to bridge that gap, one of the competitive advantages, one of the things they love about this state is that there is no income tax. And the state on their website to attract businesses does use that as one of the hooks to get us in here. So I personally don't believe in it. But let me tell you another story. I'm from Connecticut originally. I moved out here about 20 years ago. A little over 25 years ago, they instituted a income tax in the state of Connecticut. The similarities between Connecticut and Washington, they had a smaller population, but the reality is a heavily Democrat state, heavily unionized, and only the rich were going to pay the income tax. Oh, they lowered the sales tax because that's what they always say. Well, 25 years later, GDP in the state of Connecticut is 0. There are more people moving out. The budget is in such disarray that the state is actually trying to tax the Yale endowment. And it just hasn't worked. Spending is ballooned and there was no efficiencies. And that's all I see when I hear people talk about, well, we're going to lower the sales tax. That's a ruse. It's not going to happen. You might have it temporary, that income tax will go down, and it's another vehicle for the government to spend unaccountable dollars. One of the other reasons why I decided to jump into the race was, we keep spending money on education, but the outcomes don't get any better. Textbooks, where is this money going? I want to hold some people accountable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I agree, given the history in this state, I don't think a state income tax would work here. I would like to clarify the question, though, that there was a movement by the Democratic Party to pass an income tax last session. That happened, it didn't happen during the time I was there. I never saw legislation that was anywhere even near to that. It was never discussed in caucus.
I didn't say it was in the session. I said it was on the platform. It's on the 2016 platform for the state, for the Democratic Party.
Okay,
Page 22.
It sounded to me like you said that there was a movement in the legislature by the Democratic Party to do that.
Well, I mean, I think they want to. They want it to go into the legislature. I mean, that's why it's on the platform.
For clarification, you did vote on a capital gains tax, which passed in the House but didn't go to the Senate. And capital gains is a form of personal income tax.
Well, I think I disagree with you on that. I will say this, that there was no legislation in the session last time to address an income tax.
So I don't know how many of you have been noticing who else is in the audience, but we have a remarkable number of trackers in the audience tonight attempting to get video of answers to questions. And this question is certainly one that is designed to be a trap. The Republicans have decided that they will simply assert that Democrats all support an income tax, whether that's true or not. In my case, I do not support an income tax. The voters have made it very clear that they don't want one. I do think it's worth us taking a hard look at what kinds of reforms we can make to our tax system, because right now, people at the lower end of the income spectrum pay a much larger percentage of their incomes to the state in the form of tax than people at the top of the income spectrum. If you're a Starbucks barista and you make $24,000 a year, you probably pay about 10% of your income to the state in the form of taxes, because you pay almost 10% in sales tax on every purchase you make. If, on the other hand, you're a Microsoft vice president who makes $250,000 a year, your effective tax rate to the state is something closer to 2 or 3%. My father, who's a conservative Republican, retired military Nebraskan, came out to visit me a while ago. Alas, he is supporting Donald Trump. But I was talking to him about the tax system in Washington State, and he was actually kind of amazed. He's like, well, shouldn't you guys have something like a flat tax? A flat tax would be good. And I said, a flat tax would be significantly more progressive than what we have in Washington State. What we have right now, if you rank tax systems by how progressive they are, we would be number 47 out of the states in terms of how progressive we are, because our tax system taxes the poor at a much higher rate than it taxes the wealthy. It taxes small and medium-sized corporations at a much higher rate than we tax large corporations. We right now have a system in which the poor subsidize the rich and small companies subsidize large companies, and that's broken and should be fixed.
Yes. Can I ask you a question real quick?
Wait, well, we have a couple student questions, so yes.
As was mentioned, there's the tuition cut that we had a couple sessions ago that ends at the end of the session, or the end of this year. And CTC students, which are Bellevue College students amongst the other 34 schools, only got that 5% cut, and to pay for that, and to pay for the cut at the regionals and the research schools, we're seeing 85% of funding for programs. How would you, if elected, how would you reinstate funding to higher education students, especially CTCs, and what would be your vision for sustaining a tuition cut or freeze?
And the last shall be first. So I said earlier that I think that we should work toward a system in which at least the first 2 years of community college, technical school, college, training for skilled jobs should be free or as close to free as it is possible for us to make it. In an economy in which we need everyone to be as skilled as possible, and there is widespread agreement that that needs to happen, it makes sense for us as a community to make the investments in your futures and the futures of your classmates. And I think that we need to prioritize that. I think honestly that's a higher priority than a lot of the corporate tax loopholes that are currently part of the code and that cost the state. There are more than 600 corporate tax loopholes in our state's tax system that cost the state billions of dollars a year. Billions. That could instead be invested in your futures and the future of this state.
Well, I agree with Darcy. I mean, I think that if we were to reform the tax system, we do have one of the most regressive tax systems in the country, that we would be able to free up additional funds to provide for free college for a couple years in community technical college. And I think that, you know, if we have the B&O tax in particular is particularly harsh on small and medium businesses. I mean, I pay a much higher percentage of my gross profit than Boeing. If we were to make, and there are some corporations that don't pay anything. So if we were to reform B&O, and believe me, I think there's a lot of push for that within the business community as well, to reform B&O, I think that we'd be able to do that. I certainly think it's something we need to move in that direction. I feel very strongly about education, and that is definitely something I would want to take a serious look at.
I will pile on to that. I think that the corporate tax break should be done away with. I think that the B&O structure needs to be reformed because small business and medium-sized businesses, those are the incubators, those are the growth engines of the economy. I think it's what will make continue to make Washington a desirable place to do business. And what that really means for you in the college system is the better our businesses do, the more revenue they throw off in order to prioritize and continue to support our colleges, our whole college system. So I would agree that those tax loopholes, it's wrong. We shouldn't have to give billions of dollars in tax breaks to retain large corporations. I think fundamentally, if we were able to restructure the tax code where it's fair to everyone, so one particular corporation doesn't get off the hook, or that a disproportionate amount of the taxes fall on small and medium-sized businesses. I'm all for that. I will also say that I believe that there are carrots we can give corporations as opposed to sticks. There are things that we can do to entice development, and there's other things we could do to have them be better corporate citizens in a lot of different respects. I'd like an opportunity to go to Olympia to share those ideas. Thank you.
I'm just gonna have to say this. One, I could hardly hear you.
Oh, sorry.
And so I don't really have the essence of your question, and as I was listening to them answer, I think they were all different answers, and so I really don't have the essence of your question.
Can you repeat it, Paul?
Sure. So we saw a cut to funding to CTCs to pay for an unsustainable tuition cut that leaves us in a position of uncertain as to where our tuition is going to be next year or the year after, and at the same time not having the funding for programs to expand our educational opportunities during the current time. How would you restore funding to CTC education and secure a ability to plan for affordable tuition and CTC education down the road?
Okay.
So, can I try reframing
Please,
that too?
yeah.
So I think what he's asking is, you know, how would you and do you fully support restoring funding for specifically community and technical colleges? and as well as kind of a commitment to dedicated state investment in that. So that way it's not every 2 years, every time the budget comes up, we're having to like fight all over again for the same funding or, you know, yeah.
Well, I certainly hate guessing games, and that's what you guys are under. I don't think the 5%, I think that's what you guys said earlier, was what the community and technical colleges got. I don't think that's enough. It should be about the 20% decrease. Art should be 0. It should be free. I think I have had an opportunity to live in other countries, and I'll use what used to be West Germany when I was there. When a young person graduated from high school, they had one of 2 options. They either went to a tech school or community college for 2 years, or they joined the military. All of them which were free for the first 2 years. And then when they went to university status, then they started paying, but again, it wasn't that much. I really do support such ideas like that because it only makes for better education, which means a better future for us in America. That is something that I would like to see, is a model like that. Thank you.
Well, again, we're talking about funding, which brings me back around to why I'm running for office, and frankly, why I'm running third party for office, you know, as a third party candidate.
Significant challenges there, by the way. The reason I'm running is because we have a broken 2-party system. Back when Boeing got that $8.7 billion, there was bipartisan support. We have a system where government and big business are working together to create taxation and regulation on small businesses and individuals and, you know, redistribute the wealth. Also, the foreclosure issue, the bank fraud, that's gone unchecked in our state. That, again, has not been dealt with. When I ran in 2014, I agree with Patty, the B&O's got to go. It's a regressive tax on small business before they ever turn a profit. I absolutely agree with that. But again, we need to change the conversation from wealth redistribution, how are we going to tax, who are we going to tax, and the system itself that is essentially taking the wealth and the power out of communities and created the environment that we have right now. The struggle, I mean, all of these different programs that we're talking about, we need more money for these programs, but we have just, you know, since the recession and now, you're right, I mean, here at the table, we're correct. The money is circulating at the top. But don't be fooled. Who was in power when that was going on? It was the Republicans and the Democrats. Don't be fooled by that. We need an alternative. I want to bring common sense to Olympia. I want to talk outside the box and really address the contributing factors for the situation that we are in today. We have a lot of problems. We have traffic that is an absolute disaster. We have homeless spilling out into the streets.
How does that relate to the question I asked?
Let's have her finish.
I'm sorry, go ahead and repeat.
How does that relate to what I asked in funding higher ed and teaching?
Because you're talking about a symptom, and I'm talking about a systemic problem. In order to address your symptom, we need to dive a little deeper and talk about the systemic problem. We have some major problems. And as long as we continue doing this, the 2-party system, the bipartisan polarization, we're not going to be able to solve the systemic problems or the symptoms that are a consequence of those systemic problems. So indirectly, it is absolutely related to your question. Thank you.
Alyssa, I'm sorry, I thought my campaign manager may have mentioned to you that I have another commitment that a travel commitment I have to go.
Yeah.
So I apologize to everyone. I thought there was going to be a break and a more graceful time when I could exit, but thank you so much for your time. I very much appreciated the opportunity.
And so we have the gentleman here, and then we'll go right behind him.
Okay.
So, under state law, public institutions such as Bellevue College must purchase furniture from Washington Correctional Industries. There's a good expose on in the Seattle Times around the abuses of the prison industry there. It pays its incarcerated workers less than $1 an hour, and does not provide necessary job training like its charter says it should. Will you work to repeal the requirement that we have to purchase from prison slave labor, which directly and disproportionately impacts communities of color? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
So this time we'll start with Michelle on the downs.
When I answer your question, I also want to take it a step above. I think we have a system right now that we're criminalizing too many people. So I want to address that. And you can go to my platform, I talk a little bit about that. But your question again, sir, was whether or not we should be
Repealing the requirement that the state has to buy the goods made by incarcerated workers.
Yeah, I would be in favor of repealing that.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
That's a good question, I'm writing it down.
Would you like us to come back to you?
No.
Okay.
So something about me is that I have been a corrections officer in Multnomah County. And let me tell you that I am a very firm believer in you pay for the crime. Now, does that mean that we victimize inmates when they're incarcerated? No, it doesn't. An idea behind incarceration back in the 70s was rehabilitation. That is not happening. What we're seeing today is we're seeing our young people being charged with adult crimes, and then they're put into a prison system where they are being institutionalized and criminal thinking is their way of life. And that starts at 16. We've even had some kids at 13 being placed in the prison system. So that is wrong. Slavery, wrong. What we need to do is, yes, I would repeal it, that's my answer. I would work on it as a team and hopefully institute new ideas in the prison system, which is more of a rehabilitation, so that we create people getting out of that criminal thinking and into society and being productive. In my opinion, criminals have way more rights than victims do, but this is wrong too. So to answer it, I could talk on this topic, but to answer it, yes, I would be a team player and work on repealing that whole notion.
Thank you.
On the surface, I would agree with you. It seems to me that, again, to play off of my colleagues here, is that how do we stop people from getting to prison to begin with? A few times tonight I talked about Child Haven. And Child Haven is a model. It's a public-private partnership. It started out as a private organization, helping kids that were vulnerable before they started school, fostering care and lovingness and education at a very young age, and helping the families along with them. When I think about these people that we're talking about that commit these heinous and hideous or even whatever types of crimes in their teens, and now they're in the adult system, and they're pretty much ruined. You know, early intervention can prevent a lot of that. This isn't a race, this is an economic issue. And I think that the more we can intervene and provide the training and the education and the structure for people to prosper, hopefully we won't have to have questions like this into the future. So to answer your question, on the surface I would be in support of that. I believe in voluntary. I'd say give them a carrot to purchase that furniture, but they shouldn't have to. Thank you.
It is clear that our justice system has enormous problems with discrimination. The color of your skin has a huge impact on whether you will be charged with a crime, what crime you are charged with, whether you are convicted, what your sentence is. And it leads to not just a perpetuation of the injustice, but a significant expansion of the injustices that are sort of baked into our society. So I think that there is a real call to look at the entire system end to end and figure out how we make a system that we call the justice system one which is actually more just. I think that it is really problematic for us to have a program that is supposed to help teach job skills to inmates that doesn't successfully do so. It does make sense for us to try to find ways to help inmates gain actual skills that will be useful out in the world. Whether those skills are job training skills, self-regulation skills. I have a cat named Glory who came out of the Monroe Correctional Facility because they do a program there where feral kittens are fostered with some of the prisoners. It's a program that they can earn participation in, and it provides a system of reward and feedback and gives them an opportunity to nurture a creature, which is really healthy for everyone. Those kinds of things are good. Labor that takes advantage of them without teaching them anything is not good.
Thank you.
I have a question about textbook. In the past 2 years, I spent nearly $200 to buy the textbook, and it's no returnable. Like, each quarter, it's only take like 2 or 3 lessons, and that's books just I can't return. Is there? I mean, why is that? The non-returnable books are cost so expensive.
So would your question be, would they support making sure textbooks are returnable and that you can get some of your money back or all of your money back?
At least half of them.
Right. Do we want to do like a speed round if you would support that? Making sure that people could get their money back or at least part of their money back from their textbook. So like if textbooks were to stay the price they are, could there at least be a requirement that students could get partial or all of their money back if they return it in like a certain condition?
Well, and the other alternative would be to say that the library, for example, would have enough copies of the textbook on reserve to make it possible for people to complete their coursework and read their texts without actually having to purchase the book. I think that the current textbook system is a racket. It's designed to extract as much money as possible from students who have no choice in the matter. That's really problematic. And there are a bunch of ways we can approach it. We can approach it with open source textbooks. We can approach it by having the libraries have textbooks. We can approach it by having the schools get institutional licenses for electronic copies of the textbook, which are then passed on to the students. But we absolutely need to address textbook costs because the status quo is incredibly unfair to students.
Thank you.
I'll make this easy. Ditto.
I think you might need to say another word besides ditto. Just not everyone understands ditto.
I support the idea of reducing textbook costs. I think it ought to be baked into the cost of the course, whether it be open source textbooks or having the library have X amount of copies with students available. But I agree with you 1,000% on that.
I also, and we actually already talked about textbooks quite a bit, but I just would be supportive of fully refunding, really.
Fully funding and refunding.
Yes.
I don't think I would oppose any measure of fairness, but I'm with Darcy down there. We have a textbook monopoly. I mean, it's pretty much the same as when I went to college, which was quite some time ago. But I take it as step further. Let's not only break up the textbook monopoly, let's break up the education monopoly.
Thank
Come
you.
on.
All right. Any questions in the audience? All right, so let's go, Evan.
So I'm curious what kind of support you guys are willing to provide. You mentioned earlier the homelessness problem. It's a particular problem amongst veterans who are, I myself am a veteran. I've helped a handful of veterans try to find homing, and working with the VA is like fighting uphill. We had to work with somebody who actually nicknamed herself the Dream Crusher. So that's the kind of culture that the VA is currently has. So I'm curious what kind of support you guys can offer at the state level to people who are homeless, and particularly homeless veterans.
So I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Air Force for 20 years. My oldest brother, Tim, was in the Army. My brother, Jason, was in the Army and actually was in the initial invading force in Iraq. My ex-husband, Mike, was in the Army. My brother-in-law, Francis, was in the Army. And so I have a lot of veterans in my family. And I think that a lot of people pay lip service to treating our veterans well without actually delivering what's been promised. And that's a problem. A lot of the issues, sort of broadly speaking, are at the federal level, but at the state level, there are things that we can and need to do that we have not done enough of. We actually have programs specific to veterans in the state. They tend to be underfunded. There are, for example, 2 facilities that are designed to be nursing homes for veterans. One of them's down in Ording, that are, the wait lists for them are incredible. There aren't enough slots for the people who theoretically qualify to go there. In terms of housing, the problem certainly affects veterans, but is much broader than that. We have a problem with the supply of housing in this region being significantly smaller than the demand for housing in this region. And as a consequence, the price of housing has gone up and up and up and up to the point that out where I live, there's a single-wide 1977 Fleetwood mobile home on a quarter-acre lot that is currently listed for $380,000, which is crazy. Like, that's complete. There is no such thing as entry-level housing anymore. There's the first house that my ex-husband and I ever bought, we bought with a VA loan for $137,000. There is no condo in the region you can buy now for $137,000, right? It just isn't possible. And so I think we need to take a hard look at the set of policies that are restricting housing supply so severely. In some sense, what's going on is an enormous transfer of wealth from your generation to the baby boomers, whose housing prices are going up and up and up while you guys can't afford to do more than pay rent on a room in a shared unit. It is an intergenerational transfer of wealth. I saw it described by an economist I respect recently as the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in history. Because the restricted supply of housing has the impact of transferring wealth to people who currently own housing and away from people who do not. We need to build more units. The population growth is significantly greater than the housing growth has been. And we can do that by doing things like making tiny houses legal, by